Zane, I'm really excited to have you here. You've been in the fitness and longevity space since the late 90s, starting your career back in 1998 with a real focus on understanding how to prevent metabolic disease. And since then, you coached on TV, including extreme weight loss, written books, and even hosted documentaries. But the reason I wanted to invite you to this podcast and what I personally appreciate most about you is your no nonsense approach. From what I've seen, like you draw from your own experience with different dietary approaches and deliver integrative strategies that actually help people optimize their health and meet the demands of life at any age. And something that I realized, like when I was studying at IIM as a health coach, was bioindividuality. So I really appreciate that integrative approach. And I'm excited to dive into some big topics like why diets stop working, why people obsess over the scale instead of how they actually feel, and how to keep muscle after 40, and really just the strategies that actually work in real life. So let's
Thank
jump
you.
right in.
All right. Thank you, Constance. I appreciate you inviting me on. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I want to start by talking about diet dogma and diet religion and really like talk about what the biggest lies people are still believing about food and fitness, such as like, is it the obsession with cutting out entire food groups or belief one diet works for everyone or confusing short-term weight loss with long-term health? So just want to start talking about that.
Sure. Sure. Wow. Yeah. And I've spent a lot of time making mistakes in those areas. And I think that's where I've come to a lot of my conclusions is really driving some certain diets to the edge of where I just kind of hit a wall and realized, oh, this isn't working. What I do wrong, and having to back up. And so I've learned from my mistakes. When I make, just for future reference, as we go through this, it may sound I'm a little passionate or a little bit,
I love it.
you know, I hope I don't sound dogmatic, but I've made the mistakes. I'm sympathetic to people who are still there and may still be thinking in this way. I don't want to I'm not trying to make people feel ignorant or stupid or like, everybody's on a journey, and some of us we have to make a few more mistakes before we learn our lesson.
Yeah.
And,
And also there's so
and
much
I'm
like so much noise out there that it's almost really normal to be confused, I think, or like being trapped into this.
absolutely, yeah, it's hard to know who to believe. And I'm sympathetic. And so if I sound passionate, it's because I'm coming from a place of my own struggle, my own like hurdles and things I've had to learn the hard way. And
Mhm.
it's not to be directed at people who are still there. And I hope it doesn't come across that way. I do get a little worked up sometimes, but it's because I've made those mistakes. I'm sympathetic, and I'm just
Mhm.
trying to help share those.
Mhm.
So
Sounds good. Why do you think so? First of all, I'm super passionate about this, and I'm also experiencing this in person right now here as someone who lives in between Turkey and the US like half of the year. I see the difference in my body, and I think a lot of it is like related to a state of mind, levels of stress, obviously the food that I eat, but also like a lot of it's also like mindset. So, and I'm also like really passionate about this. Is there something called happy eating? Do you believe in that? Do you think, and as women, obviously, is I think is much more complex because obviously the hormones and the cycles and all that, we cannot avoid that reality as well. So yeah, and obviously when you work with your clients, like for you, I know bioindividuality is really important and everybody is different. So I want to like also like get your opinion on like mindset and weight loss, like the relationship between the two.
yeah, that's where a lot of sometimes self-loathing, but self-esteem, or just how the person looks at themselves, whether they're punishing themselves with diet and exercise, or they're really trying to nurture or nourish themselves. And diet and exercise have become very restrictive and reductionist, and especially chasing calories. I think that's where we went wrong. One of the many ways we've gone wrong, but it created this reduce. Like, we got to eat less, move more, and it leads to under eating, over exercising, which then creates stress. And so the mindset delivers behaviors that then create hormonal stress,
Mhm.
metabolic stress.
In the
Yes.
meantime, you think that whatever you're trying is not working, but it's actually the body is trying to process those things, right?
Right. I mean, so, i- i- short term, you might get a reaction. because the body's trying to adapt, like, oh, what's going on?
Mhm.
It just responds immediately to the lack of calories and the starvation state. So it starts breaking down tissue, which we perceive as weight loss. It's weight loss, but it's breaking down tissue very rapidly. But the body doesn't want to stay in a starvation state or an underfed or restrictive state or overworked and underfed. So it starts to change hormonally to correct that. It wants homeostasis. It wants stability. If you're losing 1, 2, or 3 pounds a week, you might think that's fantastic, but your body's going, we can't sustain this. We'll starve to death eventually. Right. It doesn't know you might stop. It doesn't know if you will stop. Some people don't stop. Right. We know people who keep going too far. So it starts changing hormonally to offset the dietary or exercise changes so they are not so impactful, so you don't lose weight as quickly. So it will lower your metabolism. It'll shift, you have less T4 thyroid hormone being converted into T3. So you have less energy being produced. You might actually start storing some fat when you do eat instead of converting it to cellular energy. You got lower body heat production, so less thermogenesis. You're not wasting as many calories through body heat, so the body temperature drops. You'll see, people on a diet tend to be cold, or low thyroid tend to be cold. Maybe the hair starts falling out, thinning a little bit. They just don't feel like moving as much, less energetic, mental energy, and sleep can be disturbed because in the process of trying to stimulate more energy to make up for the energy deficit in the diet is you have elevated cortisol or stress levels that are chronic. So it's not just up and down like is normal throughout the day. Like it might come up to wake us up in the morning, or cortisol might come up during a workout to stimulate more energy and more, or a stressful event, traffic, an argument, giving a speech. Those are normal moments for stress hormones to be elevated, but then they come back down. But when we're underfed chronically or overexercising chronically, then those stress hormones are elevated chronically, so nonstop, which has its own downstream impact on recovery, sleep, testosterone levels, just sex hormone regulation in general. So there's a certain, and the body uses that adaptation with the stress hormones to downregulate your energy needs so that your diet isn't so taxing, or your overexercising isn't so taxing on your body, and it makes you slow down, and you're just not going to be as active when you're not actually, like, you're going to,
Mhm.
you're going to be more sedentary generally. You may not notice it, but over time, your body uses these changes to adapt to your stressful routine, your stressful diet and exercise routine. And so that to minimize, right, its impacts. So long term, you'll stop throwing more energy. You won't need as much energy to be burned. So the diet stops working, but you're left with all these negative side effects. And that's where most people get stuck. It's like, my diet stops working. So they diet harder, they cut more calories, they cut more carbs, they extend the diet harder, they work out more, and they're inflaming the problem even more, thinking they're doing something wrong, when what they're doing is over indexing metabolic stress. They're over leveraging metabolic stress, and then the body's trying to keep itself alive longer, and adapt to that. And so you're fighting your body by continuing to stress it, and it's trying to adapt. And so you have a conflict. Eventually, you're the loser. So that's kind of what happens with most diets. We overuse them. We can use them strategically. I think there's a place for those to be used strategically, but we have to understand that they're not long term, not set it, forget it. And that just because you do something like and this is something I think that people need to understand, just because you eliminate something from your diet and it helps you lose weight for the time, doesn't mean that food is bad or unhealthy. It
Mm.
just means you created a hack or some sort of adjustment to your diet that caused your body to lose weight. But doesn't mean that food that you eliminated is bad for you or is unhealthy necessarily. That's not the way to judge that food. Like, eliminating carbs made me lose fat, so I don't need carbs must be bad. Or eliminating fat helped me lose weight, so that means fat must be bad. No, that's not how it works.
Oh.
We need both, but you need to understand that you've created a hack. And just because your goal is a rapid weight loss doesn't make that whatever changes you made to create the rapid weight loss, the ideal diet or the ideal state, or that those foods you eliminated are somehow innately unhealthy. So that is really where I think people tend to start labeling foods.
Labeling. That's a very good.
They-
That's a good point.
yeah.
I was gonna say, when do we start labeling foods? Where does it start? Because that's where we need to end it, right? So if you think about it, where does it start?
Mhm.
Is it at schools,
Well,
social?
we need to look at the source of the problems. Metabolic disease didn't exist in an epidemic form. It was very rare. So epidemic form didn't exist 120 years ago. It just didn't exist. We ate everything. We ate everything we could find. Right? We ate all foods, and we can go around the world and find indigenous tribes that still exist that eat all foods. Right? They eat everything, and we can find variations of diet, and they're all healthy because they're still eating real food. The problem began when we started making industrial foods. We had man-made food. We started making our fats that were not natural fats. They weren't natural levels in the diet. We started making these processed oils that are now make up all of the fats in processed food and most restaurants that they use. And these fats were not present. One, they didn't exist, and two, they weren't the fatty acids that are in these foods did not, or in these processed industrial oils, did not exist in the quantities that they exist now in our diet. We multiplied them by 10, 15, 20 times, you know? So, but to sum it up, we didn't have processed food. Before we had processed food or ultra processed food, right? We didn't have metabolic disease. The
We
obesity
didn't have restrict because they were whole foods and
ate everything. Yeah, we didn't restrict. We were eating to survive, one, but we ate everything. And some diets had more fat, and other diets had a lot more carb, and some had maybe more protein, depending on regionally where they lived and what was available. But we are opportunistic omnivores. We can adapt to different
hmm
diets
hmm
regionally, depending on where we are in the season. We had seasons, so things changed.
yeah.
And we didn't have epidemic of metabolic disease anywhere. But when we started making our own, or these ultra processed foods that are now make up 60-70% of the US diet, with the majority of the foods in the grocery store, that's when we started developing these diseases. The obesity rate went from 1% in 1900 to it's now 42%. Even 100 years ago, type 2 diabetes in the US was like a fraction, like a third of a percent of the population. It was such a small percentage. Heart disease was unheard of in the early 1900s. It was very rare. Most cardiologists never saw a heart attack or a case of heart disease. And so we've developed, now it kills 1 in 4, right, in the US. We've developed these diseases through our diet primarily. Well, I just mean we can look at history. Like, we don't need a lot of science. We can look at history. We just go back 100 years. What do we eat then? We didn't have disease. What are we eating now? We have disease. It doesn't take a lot of science. It doesn't take archaeology or paleontology. We don't have to go back 10,000 years. We can go back 120 years and see the difference. And we can do it thanks to the data from like USDA in the US, but the FAO, World Health. We can look at the formation of these diseases in a number of countries and in the dietary food availability, food consumption in many of the large countries in the world, and see we've developed these diseases over the last in a lot of other countries 60, 80 years. And so it's like there's a new stimulus, new disease. Neither of them existed 100 years ago. It's really not hard to figure out. It's a history lesson.
That's true. And also, like, you've spoken about elimination and you talk a lot about like vilification of whole food carbs. Why do you think like we become so afraid of them? Like, what's the consequence of that fear? Because, like, for instance, I took a gut test and I was lacking fiber. And like
Mm.
now I'm reading in the news, like in some of these trustworthy sources. Nowadays, we're so focused on protein, but we're forgetting the importance of carbs, fiber. So curious about
Yeah.
that.
Well, I mean, if we go back, so when I started getting into health and fitness, we were afraid of fat. And so we had a high carb diet, but we
We
cut
always
fat
have
way back.
nothing to be afraid of.
We do because, so again, nutrition seems like nutrition science, which we didn't need before 100 years ago. So we didn't have health problems based on nutrition and diet. Nutrition science seems to be based on a way to manipulate our diets using processed food. If we didn't use processed food, we wouldn't need them. But everything's about how do we manipulate, which processed foods can we eat and still be healthy? It seems to be the focus of modern nutrition science. And so they have to create a new demon. They have to create a new reason to be afraid of something. And again, Whole Foods never bothered us before. When we had normal natural diets, again, a variety of them all over the world. They're different from in Africa than they are from Malaysia, than from South America to Pacific Islands, Europe. There's a variety of macronutrient changes and food sourcing, and they didn't have disease. So with just like fat, with carbs, it's like if you eliminate them or you greatly reduce them, you can create weight loss based on the metabolic stress I mentioned earlier, where if we take out an element, we create enough metabolic stress, the body starts pouring fat and protein on fire while it tries to adapt to it. But it goes back to, just because you eliminate something, it helps you lose weight, doesn't mean that thing is bad. So if we eliminate carbs and we lose weight, oh, the carbs must be bad. In the 90s, we eliminated fat, we lost weight, the fat must be bad. Instead of realizing what caused the disease to begin with is the processed food, is the quality of our food, is the fact that we're eating industrial created food instead of single ingredient whole food in ratios that make sense ancestrally. Again, not going that far back, more than 150 years in each place. And they don't have to be the same. The fact that they don't have to be the same, or they didn't have to be the same, should tell us it's not about the macronutrient ratios. We can see Okinawa, right, has more centenarians, more people living to 100 than just about anywhere else in the world. Their carb to protein ratio is like 9 to 1, 10 to 1. They live mostly on yams, and they have a little bit of fish and some pork fat here and there for cooking.
Wow.
And then we have Tukasenta in Malaysia or Papua New Guinea, I think it is. And they are 80%, 65, 70, 80% carbohydrate, what they can find, maybe 10, 15% protein, not much fat because most of their food is coming from plants, and they have no metabolic disease. There's a Samani tribe in Bolivia. I think I'm saying it wrong. Samane. Anyway, they are like, again, 70, 80% carbohydrate.
That's
They have the healthiest
insane.
hearts. They have the healthiest hearts. They have the healthiest
Wow.
hearts ever studied. Like fewer people with
Wow.
heart problems over 40 than any other culture. But then we go to the Tokelau, which is a Pacific Islander. They have most of their calories come from coconut. And so they have 60% fat, but it's from coconut. And then maybe 30, 40% is coming from the carbs of like taro, yams, basically starchy roots, a little bit of fruit, and maybe 10 or 15% from protein from fish.
Wow.
And so very different diets.
Very different.
And yet no disease, and a variety of ratios. I mean, we can look at Sardinia. You're going to see it different than Inuits, or different than people living in northern Norway. They're almost like, live on a lot of elk and reindeer and maybe some roots here and there. The Maasai in Africa, 60, 70% of the calories comes from whole milk. And then everything else kind of fills in a little bit here and there, but they mostly live on milk, like 3 to 5 liters of milk a day. And so no disease. We learn from super healthy. We're screwing up our diet by eating because we have to include processed food.
Overcomplicating things, first of all.
We really are. We really are. We're very adaptive creatures until you put toxins in the body, which create oxidative stress. So these processed foods create oxidative stress in our mitochondria. Well, anyone who's studied disease, like you go even medical school, they know oxidative stress drives disease. And then they turn around and they treat the symptoms, right? But they don't treat the oxidative stress. So these processed foods, especially these oils, they create oxidative stress in our mitochondria. In our cells, that's inflammation in the mitochondria, which shuts down the mitochondria, which means you're not making cellular energy. So then the body starts, again, we have an energy deficit. The body's trying to compensate for this and ends up leading to insulin resistance in the liver. And as we're pumping out sugar, we got high cortisol levels again. And that leads to disease. So it's oxidative stress is a source of disease, not carbs, not all fat, not protein, not animal foods. It's oxidative stress. So whatever is causing too much oxidative stress is the source of the disease. And it appears to be the processed food just by process of elimination, because prior to that, we didn't have.
So anything that is causing oxidative stress, is that what you're saying? The
processed food is causing oxidative stress. And the oxidative stress leads to mitochondrial dysfunction. And mitochondria is where we make energy and heal our bodies. It's our powerhouses of our cell, right? Everything comes back to the mitochondria, to energy production and oxidative stress.
So it's the quality of food, but then also the environment, like the stress itself also is, right?
Of course. Yeah. Everything. I mean, we have, so what can we manage? Like we've always had stressful lives. Like people had to deal with season changes and, we didn't have heat and air, right? So we had to deal with winters and we had to deal with summers and we had to deal with the stress of surviving. And our bodies can make a certain amount of antioxidants from our food to deal with a certain amount of stress, but we've overloaded. But the processed food was like the thing that tips it over. Smoking causes disease through oxidative stress on our bodies, on our cells. The alcohol causes oxidative stress. It's because it's a toxin, right? And our body has to get rid of the toxin. So meanwhile, it's creating this oxidative stress in the liver. Disease comes back to oxidative stress. And we can't, if to a point that overwhelms our body's ability to create antioxidants to manage that stress. And so by our diet, because of the volume of processed food. So if you had 10% of your diet come from ultra processed food, you ate some chocolate here and there, we'll say some ice cream. Occasionally you have like holiday, you have something. Okay, your body can handle that. When it's 50, 60%, like it is in most places now, our bodies can't handle that level of stress. It's a tipping point. It's not like we can't live with no stress, but there's a limit as to what our bodies can handle with antioxidants. And after several years, like 3-4 years of consuming these highly oxidative foods, these foods that create oxidative stress, I should say, we overwhelm our body's ability to handle that stress and disease begins. And it's a process. We can do a 6-week study and look at, we give them these foods and we didn't really see much difference. No, 6 weeks. Come on, to create disease. Would you do a 6-week study on cigarettes to see if they created disease? Of course not. They create cancer or heart disease over the period of decades. Diabetes is at least a 5 to 10 year process of development. We can't do a 6-week study and look at whether a food creates enough oxidative stress to create disease because that's not enough time for disease to develop from this source. It's not a bacteria. It's not a virus. Our body's ability to handle stress. So that's where the big picture of like we're looking at epidemiology and looking at when did disease develop? How did our diet change over that time period? What shifted? And it really is where, in this case, looking at population-wide studies of different countries over the period of number of decades is going to tell us far more than a randomly controlled trial that lasts 6 or 8 or 12 weeks on a population that's already sick. You know what I mean? We're taking sick people and we're saying, if we change their diet a little bit, does that adjust things? Like they're already sick. If they're going to live in the United States,
So like, and you work in the longevity space as well, and we're gonna share your or you tell me like what's the guide that you wanted to share for those who are over 40. You have a fitness and nutrition guide, is that it?
it's called the Free 40 Plan is where you can find it. But it's basically it's a kind of a short overview of my course and how I approach clients. But I have a bigger course
Which is what I
that
wanted to
goes
ask
through.
you. Yeah, like
Yeah, it's basically
the roadmap that you follow.
yeah, it's a framework. Yeah, it's a whole food and a mix of exercise from resistance training, light cardio, some intensity, so a little bit of intense work like strength training or high intensity cardio, but mostly a lot of movement and recovery, focusing on sleep. And then, as people get older, hormones start to kind of, decline. And we don't know what metabolic markers to look at. So I put in some biomarkers in there that give people an idea of like
Can you mention all of those key lab markers?
Sure. Fasting insulin is a big one that your doctor probably won't include. Most people never heard of it. A lot of doctors a lot of them can't even read it. Like they don't know they don't know what ideal range is, but a fasting insulin is basically, the level of insulin that remains consistent or steady in your blood, even when you're fasted. So blood sugar will go up and down often, depending on what you eat. But by the time blood sugar starts going out of range, your fasting insulin's probably been out of range for 5 to 10 years. So it's an early indicator of some form of metabolic disease where your body's not able to control blood sugar. It will start going up in the background to control blood sugar. By the time your blood sugar comes out of range chronically, insulin has been rising for many, many years. So it's an early indicator. Thyroid is another one where people tend to be over-exercising, under-eating, thyroid starts to drop, or age-related, thyroid changes. And that's your energy as well. And so that can affect your mood, energy. If you feel low energy, you're going to be reaching for foods you probably don't want to eat. And so, looking at thyroid, looking at fasting insulin, I think visceral fat, people are looking at body fat, looking at subcutaneous fat, like how they look in the mirror, how they look in a bikini, whatever it
Hold
is.
on, yeah, because I wanna pause you there because like I wanted to ask you like some of us obsess over what the scale says, and then what is more important? Is it what you see in the mirror and your health, or is it that one number on the scale?
The number on your scale tells you very little about your composition, like how much of that is fat and muscle and bone and lean mass versus fat mass. And really, even deeper than that, the fat you should be concerned about more than anything else is the visceral fat, the fat below the muscle around in the torso around the organs, because that's the very hormonally active fat that's impairing the function of your organs, like your liver, which controls your blood sugar levels, or your pancreas, which can help, release insulin and glucagon, or your heart. And so it's that the fat that builds up around those organs that causes organ dysfunction, hormone fluctuation. It can turn testosterone into estrogen. It can basically shift that, it's a certain amount of testosterone into like an estrogenic type of hormone. And so it's the visceral fat is far more important than the subcutaneous fat, which is what we look at and think about it being our arms and legs. Someone can have very thin limbs, but have visceral fat building up under the surface around their organs and not realize it. And that's what's really doing the damage. That's where we have metabolic disease forming. Unless you are very, very large, like very overweight, the fat that's just under your skin on your limbs and your legs and arms is not very active. It's not very hormonally active. It doesn't really have much of an impact on your health. So our focus needs to look deeper. Needs to look at, what's hormonally active, what's really impacting our health, not just the aesthetic, and we get too caught up on numbers. But we all can have scales in our home. It's a number. We like numbers. We like simplicity. We like, am I moving? Yes or no, good or bad. It just kind of appeals to our brain of like being graded. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you lost 2 pounds, you get an A. Oh, you gained 2 pounds, you get a D or whatever. It's just kind of like we it's it's an oversimplified form of health. Again, I think it goes back to chasing calories. I think it goes back to the under eating, over exercising, early dogma of the diet culture where we were chasing calories and chasing pounds and on the scale, and it's not real health. There's not a depth. There's a lack of depth to what's really impacting our health, and it comes down to hormone levels like insulin and thyroid and our sex hormones and stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which impact blood sugar and everything else, and sleep. So I think we're getting there. I think we're slowly getting there, and people are starting to pay attention to the difference between whole food and ultra processed food. It's becoming more of the conversation now rather than just calories, but it's slow. It's slow going.
So,
There's still a lot of, it's
yeah,
just,
it is
yeah,
slow. And if there's no disease management included in this process, would you say that the focus should be more on building muscle, especially for like those who are above 40?
absolutely. Yeah. Building muscle and reducing visceral fat and recovery. I mean, we have to manage stress, right? Stress will get us. Stress will cause the fat production in the visceral area, like because it elevates cortisol, and then we have more blood sugar and free fatty acids being released, and that ends up getting stored as fat around the visceral area. It keeps us from recovering. Um, and we, I think as we get older, sometimes we have a tendency when that shift to 40, we keep trying to do things like we did in our 20s and 30s, where we could just do on a hard diet and work out extra hard, and then our bodies would respond very quickly and could recover from the stress from that diet and from that extra exercising. But as we get over 40, that recovery becomes impaired, and so sometimes we can do more damage by
Wow,
um,
really good point, actually.
over leveraging diet and exercise. Then we've elevated cortisol. Our body doesn't respond as well to that. It's disrupting our sleep. Plus, we have more stressors at that point. Whether, in your 40s, you're more likely to have a more demanding job, bigger bills, maybe some kids or a family, something like that, that are all taking from you some form of energy and recovery. And all those stressors count. All of those things, they may be good things, but they still create a level of stress that you didn't have when you were 25. And so we have to manage age. We have to treat it with respect. Our bodies are not going to respond like they did when we were 25. And so recovery is an important part, stress management, paying attention to how much our body can handle, and honoring our sleep, honoring our quiet times, honoring things that bring the stress level down, habits that bring the stress level down, or saying no to certain things,
Hmm.
right? That's being smarter, like working smarter, not harder. Kind of, it sounds cliche, but it's what we have to do as we get older. Because hitting ourselves with a sledgehammer of lifestyle changes really isn't going to be as effective. It's going to have consequences. And maybe sometimes we just need a chisel instead of a sledgehammer. We just need little changes over time. You know what I mean? We need to be more precise.
Yeah. And
And
allow
and
ourselves to like even fail sometimes, you know? It's like it's a journey. You gotta like try.
yeah, trial and error. Yeah. I don't think there's one diet. I mean, you can have a balanced diet and that can sustain you. Don't expect a lot of changes. But if you do a diet that's going to create change, like I said before, as your body adapts to it, it's going to stop creating change and start creating stress. So we can use those by cycling in and out of them for a time to get to a certain point, but realize you need to cycle out. If you do a hard, like I'm going to I want to work towards getting this goal, even physically. Like I want to run a certain distance at a certain time. Fine, you can push towards that for a certain period of time, but then you have to back out and recover. Sustaining that kind of stress nonstop, month after month for years, which is what people do. They kind of get in a set it, forget it kind of place with their exercise, with their diet, with their routine. That's not how our bodies work in seasons. And they can have seasons of stress and seasons of pushing, but then you need a season of recovery. I think that's again, that's honoring that part of our need for recovery. We had winters for a reason. We had times where there was less daylight and we slept more and we couldn't be outside to be active every year. And then we have times where it's a little more active summer. We kind of come out and play. We're a little more active and there's harvest times and things like that. So there were always seasons. And I think we've lost some of that seasonality in our modern life with, not that these things are bad. It's like saying lighting is bad or air conditioning and heat is bad. Shoes are bad. Transportation. None of these things are bad, but they have to be managed
Mhm.
because they create a certain amount of freedom in our schedules and how we live our lives that we aren't recognizing as creating their own stress. They may solve one problem, but they create new ones that have to be managed.
That's a very good point. So for those who are listening, and there's a lot of people who've seen all these different diet trends come and go, and they try them, and also they're probably like overwhelmed by these influencers online. What's like the simplest framework for someone who's confused by these conflicting diet advices and like where is it good to start? Is it that you start by getting to know yourself, testing yourself? Like, where do you start and how do you pick your diet? Or you don't pick, or maybe you mix different diets. What is it? Like, can you simply tell us? Maybe.
Yeah, I think eliminating or greatly reducing ultra processed food is the best place to start. So where most of your diet, 90% of your diet is single ingredient whole food. And then from there, you figure out what your needs are, your mix for protein, fat, carbs, what seems to give you the energy you need, help you manage the weight that you want, and then and not create more stress than it needs to. And so as far as like a stable diet, get rid of ultra processed food, but there's a lot of room for variety, as we pointed out earlier, from the different indigenous tribes that are eating a variety of diets, but they're eating from whole, naturally sourced foods. And so that's the best place to start. Get rid of the processed food, make that a small part of your diet if you're going to allow it in, and move on a regular basis. It's like, yes, we need some resistance training, but we also it can benefit a lot just by making sure we walk every day or making sure we're doing something. Yeah, being active, moving every day. We're meant to move. We're not meant to sit behind screens all day. Like we all have to do it, but we have to manage that. Like this is how we make a living, but we have to manage that and we have to make time for movement. We honor sleep schedules. We make sure we set our time for sleeping. A third of our day is sleep. These are important. So whole food, regular movement, sleep. There's a foundation, 3 pillars. Build on that foundation. And from there, decide as you get older, do you want hormone replacement therapy once you get in your late 40s or 50s? That's your decision. It can be, some people love it. Some people say no. That doesn't change the foundation. You still have that foundation of whole food, movement, and sleep. You want to throw in some peptides for a little extra edge, extra help with healing, great. But you can always keep those foundations
Mhm.
of diet, movement, and recovery. And so I think that's where you start, is get your foundation in place, and then you can play with the other add-ons.
Yes.
And then monitor your health with those biomarkers I mentioned. You get in the download. You need to be, and I educate that. I help people understand that better so they can be their own advocates for their health, because we can no longer, I think we can no longer trust our doctors or medical system to have our best interest, to really stay educated on what really works. They're looking at things they can treat. They don't have medicine to keep your fasting insulin at low. That's a lifestyle. Those are lifestyle choices,
Yes.
right?
Quick question. You mentioned peptides. I have to ask you about peptides as well. One that you mentioned. Are some like popular peptides for weight loss at the moment? And what are like the working ones? And why do you believe in them?
For weight loss specifically, you mean? Boy, those are controversial, right? I think, like, for instance, obviously the GLP peptides of the Ozempics, basically the semaglutide, tirzepatide. There's a new one, retatrutide, that's out, that's not formalized in a patent from a pharmaceutical company, but you still get it from a peptide company. These have been around a long time. First of all, they've just recently become popular because pharmaceutical companies figured out how to maximize them, how to really like put create a delivery system around them that they've patented, so that they are much more effective than they were 5 or 10 years ago. What we don't know is what kind of long-term side effects these create. Short-term, they can be amazing for someone who's obese or diabetic. And then I have people who are on the thinner athletic side that use them in small doses, like microdosing for short periods, like 6 or 8 weeks, and they come off of them for 6 weeks, so they don't build up a resistance, and they can use them in small doses, and they can be effective. I think in small doses, they're great. When you use them as a crutch, as your only leverage in changing your health, then you're going to run it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a quick fix, or you do that, but you don't change. You don't, in fact, it's cut your appetite down. It's making you lose weight, but you're not changing your eating habits or your exercise habits
It's like
at the same time.
berberine or like some of those natural things.
Right, berberines great for cutting appetite. Again, those are because they're so subtle. It's obvious they are a small part of a bigger plan, right? They're to be added into exercise and diet and things like this, where you're cleaning these things up and you're creating new habits. And so when it's something as subtle, you realize you can't rely on it. When these drugs, these GLPs that hit so hard, they tend to be attractive to people who are not willing or ready to change their lifestyle habits yet. And that's where we get into trouble, where they are the number one tool you're using, or the only tool you're using. Then you've got a problem. You're basically stuck on it, right? You are reliant on that indefinitely because you're not changing anything else. Oh, and that's where I think we have the problem. Like, we have effective tools, but we misuse the tools, or we rely too much on the tools instead of going back to that foundation that I mentioned before. And so I think that they're effective. Right. And for someone who's diabetic or obese,
yeah,
you don't need a long-term solution for those reverse things, like being diabetic and obese. You talk about a sustainable plan. Some diets are not sustainable long-term. These GLP ones, I don't think, are sustainable long-term in the doses that they're giving. But being diabetic or obese is also not sustainable long-term, in my opinion. You're shortening your life. And so you got to choose your poison, fix the immediate problem, and then find a solution for long-term health. And that's where I think there's on an individual basis, you've got to look at the situation and go, how do we manage this well to get the person out of the way of the disease, but then solidify the lifestyle so that they don't go back to it. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you can have a hard hitting tool, but you make the other changes and reverse the disease quickly, but then stabilize things so they don't go back. And if we know what caused the disease, it was not apples and bananas, it was not meat, it was not butter, it was processed food that caused the disease. And let's eliminate the processed food and stop accusing whole food of causing disease, and get rid of the processed food, and they won't go back. Right? They won't go back to this disease. And so if you don't know what caused the disease, it's really hard to reverse it or avoid it. And so we end up relying too heavily on these tools like GLPs. So other peptides, I mean, I like some for, stimulating growth hormone, like the ipamorelins and the CJC 1295. And there's some that do help with healing, like the BBC 157s and things like that. There's a variety of peptides out there that can help, but they're all very subtle. And they haven't been magnified like the GLPs have. The GLPs have had an extra, like I said, extra delivery mechanism to them that makes them very powerful. And so that's why they stand out.
Okay.
But yeah,
Thank
that's where I am now. That's where I am now. Ask me 5 years from now, I might have.
Yeah, who knows? And that's the part of it that I mean, we need to be flexible and remember that it's a trial and error.
It's trial and error. It's a journey.
Yeah. So as closing, I want to ask you a couple of no BS questions. Are you ready?
Okay, I'll do my best. I
Okay.
tend to be
Cool.
as you can tell, I don't have a lot of one-word answers.
These are quick questions.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Quick and honest questions and answer.
Okay.
What do you think is the biggest waste of money in the fitness and wellness space right now?
Hmm. Boy, are cleanses still a thing where people are getting these cleanses and these mixes and doing, I'm going to do a cleanse. It's like, I think that was a big waste. And plant-based proteins, plant-based, yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next question. One healthy food you will never touch.
Ooh, that's the same answer. Plant-based protein, like pea protein, peanut butter protein, these legume-based protein powders. Doesn't make sense. I mean,
Not effective.
animals make great protein. Plants make great energy. I don't use protein for energy or plants for protein. So it's just, they have their role.
Last question is gonna
Okay.
be, which you kind of answered, but a wellness hack you actually respect. You see in others and you're like, okay, I respect that.
A wellness practice, you mean? Or what?
Like a hack, yeah.
A hack. I mean,
Maybe you
so
don't
my
agree
focus,
with it, but you just like respect.
I actually have seen the most benefit as far as the hack goes, like something that's not the foundation. It's not diet, exercise, or sleep. With hormone replacement therapy, with my I have a lot of clients who are over 50, over 40, really. There's only so much you can do beyond the point where your sex hormones are just dropping. And that's just part of age. And so I think hormone replacement, if you want to call it a hack, is the one I've seen the most benefit in people's lives, just from mood, from health, from disease prevention. And I think I think it's still progressing. I think there's a lot to learn from it. I think there's a lot of abuse, but I think there's the greatest potential for extending life and vitality and quality of life beyond middle age with hormone replacement therapy and keeping those foundations that I mentioned earlier in place.
Okay. Thank you for the honest answers.
Sure.
Anything else that you would like to mention before we go?
Yeah, I'll mention one thing. I'll try to keep it quick. We have a problem with our diets becoming part of our identity and getting like married to our diets, in love with our diets, and a good community, and creating a community that reinforces this. And if there's any variation, people attack them, and that's very cult-like, in my opinion. And I would just say, don't fall in love with your diet.
Yeah.
Don't fall in love with your diet. It's a tool. It's a strategy. It's a friends with benefits kind of relationship, really, at the most. It's just like, use it while it's good for you, and then get out when it's not. But don't fall in love with your diet. Treat it like the strategy that it is, and honor your individuality.
That's with it. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. These are great. Yeah, I really appreciate your time. And obviously, people can find you where?
I'm very active on Instagram, Zane Griggs Fitness. YouTube is Zane Griggs. But actually, if you're looking into my socials, I'll be on my website, which is zanegriggs.com. It's an easy place to find my socials and the free 40 plan links.
One-on-one consultations at the moment?
Doing some, yeah. Doing some one-on-ones. Yeah,
anyone interested can reach out.
Yeah, through zanegriggs.com. Yeah, or on Instagram if they want to reach out to me there. If it's just, but zanegriggs.com, there's an intake there.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you.